This program has been approved for one IDCEC CEU. To receive credit for this program, please submit your full name, IDCEC number, program class code, and your summary essay to ceu@iida.org. The program class code is located alongside the title of this program on the IIDA Academy page. For a certificate of completion to use toward another certifying body, please submit the same information to ceu@iida.org. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We are about to talk about sustainability, climate change, and its relationship to equity and inclusion. All are big topics that have been traditionally siloed, but are actually intrinsically linked. I'm pleased to be speaking with leaders in the interior design industry about these important issues, especially because they are Verda Alexander, co-founder of Studio O+A based in San Francisco. And I've known Verda for a long time, but I've noticed just recently that she's changed her title on LinkedIn to climate designer. So I thought that was very interesting as an award-winning designer who has been sort of redefining workplace for the past 30 some years. We also have Holley Henderson, founder of H2 Ecodesign based in Birmingham, Alabama, and is otherwise known as the common sense environmentalist who helps clients develop and implement sustainable strategies, conducts workshops and consults on green products and market positioning. She's also an author of a book, Becoming a Green Building Professional, and works quite often with research scientists. And lastly, we have Allison Smith, the sustainable design leader at HKS based in Dallas, and she manages HKS's many sustainability projects, including multiple LEED V4 Platinum projects and WELL projects. And she supports industry-wide transparency materials initiatives and is a founding member of the Texas Materials Initiative. So I'm very excited to begin this discussion with you all. And I'm super curious about your origin stories in regards to sustainability. If you can share that a little bit with us. What does your elevator pitch sound like? I'm going to start with you, Verda.
Okay, sure. You know, elevators pitch is short, so I'll try to be short. Yeah, I feel like my road to sustainability started out kind of as a slow build. And then I had this like aha moment in 2019. And it started out with, I've been doing workplace for 30 years. And the last decade or so, things had just gotten crazier and wilder and more excessive. And as much as we've been creating these beautiful spaces with all kinds of varieties of places to work and kind of redefining workplace, I also felt like there was just so much excess and waste, and these beautiful workspaces were for like a very small percentage of the population. So I started to explore how can design do more, go to communities, do more good. And that was like this long kind of exploration that led to 2019 here in California, third year of wildfires. And I was just looking out my window, and you could, the sun was that weird orange color and everything was hazy and you could barely breathe. And my aha moment was like, oh my God, climate change is our #1 existential crisis. I have to put all my resources, everything that I can, into addressing climate change. And so that's what I've been doing. And so the climate designer title I've been trying to learn, and I didn't know a whole lot in 2019. So I've just been taking a deep dive into climate change and everything that's related to it. It's such a bigger problem than I ever imagined. And there's so many interconnected components, but I took a class called Becoming a Climate Designer. And it was a little 8-week class that I took. And I'm like, I took this class and I'm just going to call myself a climate designer.
That's awesome. How about you, Holley?
It's so funny, Verda, because first of all, thank you so much, IIDA, for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And Verda, when I was listening to your explanation of how you come to this, I thought, gosh, there's so many overlaps in our paths, you know. I started out as an interior designer working on convention centers. And so the large scale, you can literally lay the Eiffel Tower down in one room. The scale and magnitude had me with an early midlife epiphany of, oh my gosh, what's the meaning of my work and my life and the waste in the process. And I actually found myself pitching to the design firm that I was working for that they should start a green studio. And this is really when LEED was in its infancy. And I found the design firm, it was a very entrepreneurial design firm, TVS Design, based out of Atlanta. And they said, okay, Holley, you've built the argument, you know, write a business plan, we'll back you. And I was like, yes, what is a business plan? I had no idea, you know, so I write the business plan for them, run their green studio for a couple of years, was so inspired by Ray Anderson and his transparencies early on and his story. And so I left TVS to go work for Interface for a couple months. But at that time, you guys, LEED was just taking off and they needed people in the trenches to do the consulting for it. So Interface understood when a little bit less than a year, I said, I think I want to start my own thing. And that was about 18 years ago now. And Interface was so amazing because they gave me several projects to work on. That was really the foundation of the beginning of the firm. And since then, it's another interesting thing you said too, Verda, about the wildfires being such a catalyst for you. Currently, I'm collaborating with research scientists, Chemical Insights Research Institute. Many of you guys will know the founder, Dr. Marilyn Black, who founded Green Guard. And we're actually doing research on wildfires right now. And so it all overlaps. There's so many synergies between all of our stories. And so, I don't know, it's pretty exciting. I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much.
That's so interesting working with actual scientists. I feel like as designers, we've always been sort of considered, you know, unscientific, but in fact, we have to incorporate that quite a bit. Allison.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me as well, Angie and IIDA. So my journey really, I mean, in my youth, I started a recycling club in my elementary school. So it's always been a part of, I guess, what I did. But as I grew up and went to school, the education programs I went to were very much sustainability focused. And so design was always approached from that perspective of also including sustainability. And so then I went into practice and had a more traditional role, but for about the last 8 years, I've had a role that was focused on sustainability and helping to guide teams to make their projects more sustainable. So it's I would say, you know, it's kind of that youth exuberance really, I think guides a lot of us today, and then we figure out how we can really start to make some action and some substantial change in our world.
Wonderful. It sounds like each of you have sort of, you know, been converging your personal and professional views towards sustainability. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Whoever goes first this time.
I can jump in. So I feel like it reminds me a lot of when I was doing design work, and form follows function. And you might know the green rules of the road, but oftentimes for convenience or for other reasons, you might do the other thing. So it's oftentimes like when you design a space for yourself and you're like, why did I put that light switch in that spot? You know, I think oftentimes with green consulting and sustainability, we know the right thing to do. But I'm challenged with it. I'll be completely transparent about that. You know, have I done a complete chemical audit on every single thing that goes into my body and touches my body? No, I haven't. But have I started those things? Yes. And that is pretty exciting to me. Just, you know, knowing where to start, maybe just start with 5 chemicals, you know, this year. These are the 5 chemicals I'm going to try to get out of my personal, you know, world this year. So that's kind of where I think my professional and personal sustainability merge or converge, if you will?
Mhm.
Yeah, for me, so the wildfires happened, and then I was off to London for some awards event, and I was at the Tate, and I saw this little pink book called "This Is Not a Drill," and it's Extinction Rebellion's manifesto. I read the whole thing on the plane ride home and cried and freaked out and this and that. And the ultimate thing that I learned from it is that it's about peaceful protest, and this idea that you can move mountains if you can get a very small, you don't have to convince everyone about climate change. You just need a very small percentage of the population being very active, peacefully demonstrating and protesting. So it made me think about, like, what is my greatest impact personally and professionally? Like, where can I make the biggest impact? And I have gone out and protested. I'm not the one chaining myself to banks or anything like that. I'm like in the back holding the signs and things like that. But I do that. But I also feel like it's important within our industries to maybe not so much protest, but be out there looking at what's going on in terms of legislation, thinking about how we can amplify our voice as a firm or as an industry. And so that's really what I've been focused on exclusively, because we just don't have the time to sit here with small things like reworking our materials library. Yes, that's important to do, but we need to do that, but we need to also amplify and make as big of a splash as we can, as quickly as we can.
Yeah.
Yeah, scalability is super important. How do we get this at that larger scale? I think that we can learn from small steps. A small step on one project can build to a bigger step on the next project. And also sharing those stories with our colleagues and others in the industry allow us all to start to move more quickly towards, this end goal that we have of a more sustainable future. And so from a personal perspective, I think also demonstrating that you do these or kind of take stock of this in your own life. I do, in my professional role, talk a lot about materials. So, from a personal perspective, that would also be thinking about the kinds of purchases I'm making at home too. And there's a lot of alignment that you can draw, asking yourself the same types of questions. And if you're not willing to do something for yourself, or if you wouldn't want to use a particular product for yourself, why would you specify that on a project so that everybody else, is exposed to it for the same reasons that you wouldn't want to use it?
That's fantastic. I do think you have to personalize it to kind of humanize the process, right?
Yeah.
It has become a little abstract somehow. So the next question I have for you all is, how you see the critical role that our industry has in moving sustainability forward, like tying it to equity and diversity and inclusion even. Some unlikely bedfellows. Allison, can you start with?
Sure. So there are so many important issues, and we're going to touch on a lot of those today, but it's a very complex kind of interweaving of these different issues, and they connect to each other. They're not single focused issues, but I think one of the most critical things that we can do is really taking note of embodied carbon in our designs. This is a role that interior designers have, but the embodied carbon is not just about carbon in our atmosphere and reducing kind of those environmental impacts, but it's also about impacts, just not at the project site, but throughout the supply chain. There's a lot of communities that are adjacent to manufacturing facilities that are going to be have a stronger kind of a stronger negative impact from some of those materials than maybe the particular occupants in your building or within your space. But embodied carbon also just has larger impacts about our total carbon within the atmosphere, and being able to keep climate change hopefully to a minimum, and so that we can all continue to kind of thrive in this world that we've built for ourselves.
And Verda, you're coming from, a very artistic background as well, and design was your primary focus. How are you feeling about this role?
Yeah, so I guess I would address it as speed and scale. We have to move quickly. I've seen so much movement in just the last few years. It's super encouraging. Like everybody is talking about it, but I still think it's not fast enough, of course. We need to learn from each other. There are certain firms like Perkins and Will and some others that have more resources than a smaller firm like us who are way ahead, and they need to bring others along. We need to share resources, things like that, so that we can all catch up and we can all really be designing sustainably. And then I think in terms of scale, we need to not just be thinking about sustainability, but really thinking about being regenerative, and this kind of goes back to equity, right? We have a certain standard, workplace standard, living standard here in America, and it's way above and beyond anybody else's standard anywhere else on the world. And we need to understand that standard depends on exploitation and extraction of other parts of the world. And so every time we design, we should be thinking about how can we give back, or how can we do more somewhere else, in addition to being sustainable or net zero or whatever. And to me, that would increase this idea of scale.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Holley, I know that you're involved a lot in trend forecasting. I would love to hear where you're seeing the largest shifts in practice and attitude, behaviors, beliefs, everything regarding sustainability and with those lenses.
Mm-hmm. Angie, I don't know if you were with me. I saw an amazing trends forecaster, and I feel like you might have been at this meeting with me. And one of the things that they said was one of my favorite things, and I repeat it all the time. Someone in the crowd stood up, and they were from one of the big firms, either Gensler, Perkins Will, or something. And they said, how do I stay ahead of the trends? And what you'll realize as a designer, as you grow, you're like, gosh, it's a lot of work to keep up with these haircuts and these outfits and everything, but I want to stay on trend, and I want to stay on trend personally and also with what I'm creating, but I want it to be timeless at the same time. And what I thought she said was fascinating. She said, go purchase 3 magazines you would never purchase in a million years. So for me, that would be like cats and kittens. It would be like knitting or something, or something that's just completely out of my realm of the opposite of what I think. And also go download 3 pieces of music you would never listen to in a million years. So if you like country, download rap or what have you. And I think by saying that, when you ask me about trends forecasting for sustainability, I try to look way outside of our realm, because what I find is the same threads are being talked about with all the built environment magazines or all the built environment firms, even when they go to interview for getting new work or what have you. So that would be one of my big pieces of advice for trends forecasting, is look outside, way outside of our bubble. And then, what I would say in terms of what I'm seeing is this is our opportunity as interior designers to bring this conversation to the table. We've all had the experience of the pandemic the last couple of years, and it's made the interiors more important than ever. And people realizing aerosolized, things in our air, making the air visible, thinking through what we can do and bringing that conversation to the myriad of consultants that we might have on a job, I think is really important. Of course, we're all seeing the health and wellness and transparency trends. I'm even seeing a big trend where I felt like lead diminished a little bit on the domestic side, and it went more to the global community. I'm seeing it come back and a little bit of a resurgence domestically. So those are just a couple of things that I'm thinking about on the trend side. And carbon, of course. The other panelists mentioned carbon, but of course, carbon's a big topic right now.
Yeah, just real quick to add to that, and I love that idea of thinking about way outside of our own bubble, but talking about the fact that our industry, the construction industry, owns 40% of that carbon emissions pie, and just talking about it is so important.
Yes, and I'm going to go and buy cats and kittens. Is that what it was called? Immediately after we're done. Love that. That's really good. Outside of our bubble. Allison. So, I have a very persnickety relationship with ratings. I know that they've done a lot of good, but I'm skeptical as well for many reasons, but I'd love to hear your take on the value. Do they help, et cetera?
Yeah, so I mean, I work with ratings a lot on a day-to-day basis, so I certainly have that perspective. And then also, I kind of full disclosure, I am part of the Materials and Resources Technical Advisory Group with USGBC, so help develop the current version of LEAD and have done some similar work in the past with other ratings too. So I do think that they're very valuable. I think, looking at LEAD, if we go back to the first version of LEAD, the industry has changed so much. And I think as a result of having that standard out there for people to look to and get the industry to change what was standard practice to the new standard practices. So each version of LEAD kind of raises that bar a little bit further. And I've seen a lot of change within the industry as a result of that. So thinking like 10 years ago, when we're talking about sustainable materials, we're talking about recycled content, for example, or maybe regional materials, which still hold value, but the conversation has been able to grow from there and has been able to move to a place where we can really talk about what the health of those materials are and the health impacts throughout our communities. And so that would not have been possible without a rating. I don't think there would have been the momentum or sort of that stick that it needed to help move the industry in that way. I've also worked on projects that have sustainability goals that are not certification focused. And I think having that third-party review really keeps people honest and keeps them to uphold something throughout the entire project rather than setting good intentions and then maybe something gets a little too difficult or they can save a little bit of money and then and starting to weaken what was originally intended. So I am a supporter of rating systems. There are also challenges with that. It's not something that every project can afford to pursue. It can be a real challenge in some of those international locations as well. And so I think that the rating systems do need to be more attuned to being able to bring in some of those smaller projects, some of the projects that maybe are not as high performing as a LEED certified project is, and having an entry point for them, as well as thinking about strategies to help allow some of these international projects as well to be able to participate more in the rating systems.
Amazing, thank you. I mean, I totally agree. They're key in making progress on a certain level.
Yeah.
But Holley, I know that you're also helping a lot of people navigate this kind of intricate, complex gamut of, it's almost like a game. It's been gamified, gold, silver, bronze. How are you feeling about how this affects the sort of equitable access to a sustainable, healthy product?
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that question. And I couldn't agree with Allison more. A couple of things I think that I admire the rating systems. For example, when LEED version 4 came out and they kind of overshot the mark and they basically made the bar too high and people just could not meet some, and I know Allison knows that probably better than anyone being on the MR tag. So when they were willing to, engage with WAP sustainability and, look at how they could make that bar work for more people, I think that is getting to that equitable goal that you're talking about. And where they were still challenged, but they weren't challenged beyond their capabilities where no one was pursuing those credits really. The other thing I think that I'm super excited about is that with Peter Templeton as the new incoming president and CEO at U.S. Green Building Council, and with Rachel at Well, and with Joanna at Fitwell, I think my challenge would be, I know all of their intention is in the right place, and they're, in in terms of speed, which is one of the things Verda's brought up a couple of times. I mean, I think they are really looking to speed and scale and knowing that their own systems have limitations, but I think they're both very capable. They're all very capable of doing it. I know Peter was previously the World Green Building Council, so he's seen it from every single, rating system that's out there. But I think the more, you said earlier, Angie, I'm the common sense environmentalist. Trying to reach people and make these systems plug and play easy and getting more people on board and then raising the bar, I think is really key, making them easy to document, easy to use. And I have to give a plug to Building Green right now, one of my favorite resources that doesn't have any advertising or funding tied to it. Those guys do such a great job, but they basically translate a lot for me in terms of what is people speak. Like if I have to do this lead credit and I need to know what the documentation looks like, I don't go to the USGBC website, to be honest with you. I go to Building Green website and I hear from somebody on their lead user platform who's talking to me about how to do these things. So those are a couple of nuances that I think will help more people be able to do the rating systems. And I do think that they are necessary. I've found, at the end of the day, schedule and budget drive. And if you don't have a rating system holding you to it, I haven't found a lot of clients that can stand to it and keep it in place, even if it's a goal without the rating system. So
I cannot tell you how many times I've been on a call where somebody will go, oh, let's do that. Wait, how many points are we going to lose? And although we don't really want to take things back to points, then you say we're going to lose 2 points. They're like, nope, we're not changing that. It really just kind of holds them, to that intention.
Interesting. Well, back to you, Holley, in terms of your experience, with clients asking, different or new questions regarding sustainability and equity, what's your view on that?
I find that their catalyst has remained the same in a lot of ways. It is competition. They want to be able to compete. I do find when I can bring things into the picture, such as the framework from the UN SDGs or the UN Sustainable Development Goals, they can be very interested in that because they see it from a global perspective, especially if they are a global company. And that's a very palatable entry point for equity and some other aspects that I want them to pursue and to think about with corporate sustainability reports, ESG and those types of things. But oftentimes I find the motivators are very similar to what they have been for the past decade, honestly. Those are my initial thoughts on that one.
And I'll just add, we had a few forward-thinking clients here on the West Coast that have been asking for that. And one client specifically down in the Los Angeles area really wanted us to take a deep dive into equity and what equity meant within their space that we were designing for them. And we even had to give them an accounting of our makeup at our firm and things like that. So that was really interesting. And then another firm that we were working with up in Portland wanted to reuse everything possible, absolutely anything and everything possible, including toilets and sinks and HVAC systems and cabinets. So we're getting asked. It would be nice if it was even more than that, but I am seeing companies starting to do these things because it's the right thing to do, and that's encouraging.
Well, that's great to hear. I'm seeing it also on my side in terms of ESG, as Holley mentioned, and code of ethics, and that's very encouraging. It seems like people are taking it personally to heart as well. And sort of tied to that, through the pandemic, I know you and I have been having conversations, Verda, about how the sustainability shift is tied to this, intense urgency. What are you seeing in terms of urgency from your side of it?
The pandemic.
Yeah. So sustainability after, the pandemic, we sort of shut down and skies were blue and emissions were lowering and,
coyotes were roaming the streets. Wildlife was coming back. We had clean air for a brief period of time. It was this amazing time of reflection, kind of and having time to reflect. It's not something that we typically have the luxury of. So from that perspective, it was interesting. And then we had some wild civic stuff, social unrest stuff happen with the murder of George Floyd, which brought equity to the forefront of the conversation, which it hadn't been before. So dovetailing that into sustainability, or thinking about how that relates to sustainability. And, we talk a lot about how the people that pollute the least are the ones most impacted by climate change and pollution. But what also happened during the pandemic is that 99% of the world's population, their incomes went down. And the 10 richest men, and yes, men, their incomes doubled. So the inequity gap is only growing, and it presents so many problems. I mean, I think equity is at the root. Like, we need to solve for equity in order to solve for climate change. And part of the problem, if you just look at our politics and what's going on and who's buying what special interests, right? There's just so many issues that concentrated wealth creates, and the inability of other populations to have a voice because they're in poverty and they can't even think about climate change because they can barely get food on the table, right? So it's such a big issue and topic, and I think the pandemic brought it to the forefront. But I fear that we're just kind of bouncing back to normal, or pretend normal or whatever. So I'm a little concerned, but I do think it was an interesting period to learn from.
Agreed. I think that the time we gained to examine, the impact of all of our actions in the industry, gave us a lot of lessons that we're still remembering. We're talking about it after all, but you're right. We do feel like we're sliding in the wrong direction just a tad.
Yeah.
So the past few years has seemingly changed virtually everything, if not everything. Do you all think, well, maybe Holley, I'll direct this to you. Do you think it can be a catalyst for us to design with the right amount of care and compassion for people and planet?
I think so. I think it's opened a lot of our eyes. I've been very inspired by, I'll tell you guys a little quick case study. So there were some vulnerable populations, lower socioeconomical vulnerable populations that were experiencing wildfires. And they were basically what we call in the Southeast, jimmy rigging. So they basically were taking a box fan, slapping a typical filter on it, duct taping it, and saying, how can I filter my air? I mean, this is a cheap, low cost, effective way that I can do this. And the EPA got wind of this and they said, is that going to catch fire and cause a secondary fire? Is that even safe? But because these people can't afford air cleaners, right? Which would be the solution, the optimum solution. So that team that I'm working with, the Chemical Insights Research Institute, they did all this testing on these fans and filters, and they tried to basically catch them on fire, and they couldn't catch them on fire. So now this is a solution that we can give to those vulnerable populations and say, this is completely safe to do. It's a great low-cost solution. So how is it that they can inform our work? There's a lot of things they're doing that vulnerable population set that inspires me, that then can we take that into our work and give it, and make sure that it is a thoughtful design back to them. Does that make sense? So it kind of becomes this circle, like we think we're informing them when really they're informing us. They know the best about reduction. They know the best about recycling. They know the best about reusing, And so I don't know, I'm kind of inspired by that. And I really do think that as a profession, we can begin to be more thoughtful.
Yeah, and I think we've shifted for sure from healthy buildings and thinking about non-toxic materials that are bad for humans to thinking about, okay, well, that's all and great if your building is healthy, but if you open your door and go outside and you can't breathe the air, or you're losing biodiversity, or pandemics are happening, then it doesn't matter how healthy your building is. So I do think that we've expanded our our mission, truly. I do think we've done that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I personally have been thinking much more bigger picture regarding everything. So I think the catalysts are everywhere. In fact, I remember when my kids demanded, talking about some catalysts, my kids demanded that I take off work, when we were still living in New York, and Greta Thunberg was in town leading a climate march. And I had to drive home from work and take them through it. But it really drove home for me this sense of urgency, all these young catalysts demanding that we do better. I'd love to hear, maybe I'll start with you, Allison. Are you seeing also a difference in thinking about approaches to sustainability with younger generations?
Yeah, we are a team, the team that I work with at HKS, a team of sustainability focused professionals. And I feel like we've sort of been this advocate within the firm. We definitely have a lot of other champions throughout the firm that help support and share our voice and information. But over the last few years in particular, it seems like every young designer, every kind of new graduate that comes into our practice at HKS reaches out to us to find out how they can get engaged and what they can do to be more sustainable designers. And so I've seen such kind of a groundswell of that just in the last couple of years. There's always been that interest in people who do have that interest, but I think, it is just at it's kind of this astronomical steep rise.
I've been thinking, well, I have a 19-year-old who's in art school right now. And I think a lot about how I grew up and thinking about my future and the future of the world. And that I think the number one difference with these young people is that the future is very different, looks very different for them for the first time in history, right? And there's a lot, I was just reading an article about mental illness and depression and things like that. And, it's something that I don't know if we need to address specifically, but it's something to be aware of and to understand that they're looking at this. So, we're grappling with it too, but we've already had all of this youth and that with a different viewpoint. And so a lot of people say, oh, we need to count on our youth to save us, but I think it's really on all of us, and ultimately just understanding that that they're seeing the world differently. And it's exciting that so many young people are really much more aware than we ever were, of course, about sustainability and equity and things like that. And they give me so much energy, but we can't count on them alone. It's up to all of us.
Absolutely. Holley, do you have any thoughts on our younger generation?
Absolutely. I recently did a presentation for young graduates, and I have to say that, or they're on the precipice of graduating, some of them, and I have to say they are inspirational. They are so excited about it. It's part of their vocabulary. They can't extract it. I think our generations, or I'll say my generation, could partition it, where I don't think they do that. They think about it in a much more integrative way. One thing I want to offer, and I'll send this to the IIDA folks, is we have a free chapter, an e-chapter in that book that I worked on. There was a bunch of interviews of young professionals from across the built environment industry and how they were able to integrate sustainability into their work. So you guys can send that out as a free thing for everybody who's participating after this.
Amazing. Thank you. So we're getting closer to the end, but we have a couple more questions. I'd love to hear, Verda, you talked about earlier that we need to learn from each other. Do you want to expand on that? Because I'd love to hear more.
Sure. And in fact, maybe I can plug my Northern California chapter, because just yesterday we did something, what we're calling the climate crawl. And we've engaged a sustainability leader or 2 or 3 from all of the firms within the Bay Area to join together once a month, and one firm hosts. So last night it was EHDD that hosted, and they created just on their own, own resources, a carbon tool for interiors that they shared with the group. And, we learned about how the impact of furniture and carpet, like the different things, and how the different levers work. And even if we don't use the tool, it's so eye-opening to think about how you can impact a project around carbon impact. And next month we're going to Revel. And I think it's amazing. And the best part was how energized and excited everybody was to be there and to be sharing. And I think we can all do it. I think we just have to drop our NDAs and drop our and share everything and anything and everything that might help us move faster.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that there's a lot to look forward to. I think, even though there's a lot of dim future scenarios and a sense of helplessness many times, there is this kind of rising anger and hope that comes with that. And I'm getting prompted to start going into the Q&A. So I'm gonna thank you all and just ask you to just hold tight, because I want to share some of the questions that have been filtering in. The first one is about a measurement tool. Is there something like that can help us know how to rate inclusivity, and or how can we keep ourselves accountable with this issue?
So I don't think that we have, or at least I'm not aware of exactly a measurement tool that will do that. There is a rating, a rating out there that WELL has called the Health Equity Rating, and that is trying to quantify and get at some of those issues for kind of holistically for a project. But over the last few years, within the industry, this is a subject that I feel like we've touched on kind of tangentially for a long time. And then over the last few years, there's been a lot more action. And I've seen kind of the issue of equity starting to drive some more of the conversation. So I know, for example, the Health Product Disclosure Collaborative is developing or doing some work around kind of social equity and materials. Mindful Materials, of course, is doing that as well. And then also there was the release of the EJ tool, the environmental justice tool, that I think starts to give us some more resources to be able to kind of universally work through some of these issues and start to identify some of the problems so that we can respond to them. But I don't know of it, something that is really kind of calculated. I don't know if anybody else does.
I think that's a great list. The only thing I would add to that is maybe B Corp for architectural firms, design firms might be a good idea. And also the UNSGGs we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, no, and I could also speak to HKS that signed on to the UN Global Compact back in 2020. It's something that we definitely track our progress against every year.
I'm actually happy to say that I just got an email from my lawyer that we're actually an official B Corp and hope to be certified very shortly here. And I think the issue though with B Corps is there's not a lot of them out there. So it's not that easy to do business with a B Corp, but I do think Mindful Materials and Ecomedes, they're going big on that whole, when you search a material, they're going real big on those categories around how is it sustainably sourced, on all these different, what kind of labor was used, how's the company treat its employees. So there's going to be boxes that you can at least check or look at when you search materials in the very, very near future, from my understanding.
I totally agree. I think Mindful Materials is headed in exactly the right direction. They are going to be making some big announcements at Greenbuild. So in early November, you guys look out for how they're planning on restructuring things a little bit. They have the right team at the right time.
Amazing. That's great. Here's another question about what are the best educational resources for learning how to integrate sustainable design into a project holistically?
I think I might suggest getting your AP. So whether that's Fitwell Ambassador, or your lead AP, I would say don't do what I did. I decided to study for Well and Fitwell at the same time. So I'm constantly confused about which one we're talking about. Is it a feature or is it get the names mixed up all the time because I studied at the same time for both those tests. But I think getting the accreditation is really helpful and just giving you a good foundation for then being able to integrate it in your day-to-day work. I'm going to think more on that too. I think Building Green might have some good integrative design process tools as well.
I want to echo Building Green has a lot of really wonderful resources. This is more materials focused, but also from an integrative perspective, the Parsons Healthier Materials program is really great. And it's something that we within HKS, advocate for our designers to do. And it's such an affordable resource for anybody to be able to go through that program. And I highly recommend it.
Yeah, and if you're looking at carbon, the Carbon Leadership Forum is a great place to go. And Metropolis Magazine has a climate toolkit. And when you're addressing climate, you naturally start to address everything holistically.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I like that toolkit. Here's another question, a juicy one. How do we address those big industry clients whose business may be the worst culprit of carbon and pollution to the climate? Eek.
Can I take that one? Because I'm a big proponent of, I don't have any adversaries in this realm. I don't have anybody who's trying, I don't have any bad actors. I don't even care if they believe in climate change, you guys. I don't care about any of it. And I think it's a completely different approach. It's like, if we're a 50-50 nation and we've got some people that some people would deem to be bad actors, I'm like, you got to meet them where they're at. You've got to meet them where they're at. And I've found it to be wildly successful. It's completely counterintuitive to some of us, but I am just at peace with where they're at. And I'm trying to help them just move it up a notch. So I feel like looking at it with that perspective, even some people I think designers and manufacturers are kind of in this contentious thing. I don't think so. I think manufacturers want to do the right thing. We just got to help them get there. So I feel like holding their hand and walking them down the path is really the way to go. I don't find that you motivate a lot with negativity and you're in trouble for doing this. I just don't find that to be a motivator for me or for any of my clients either. So I feel like, I think a counselor taught me something a long time ago, and it was a great trick, and not trick, it's a great tool, and I use it a lot. If you're working on something for me and I don't have a response back yet, I'll write and say, I know you're working on this, but can you give me an update? So in other words, I trust you. I know you're trying to do the right thing. So I think those kind of mechanisms really help in the conversation. And I also think a huge thing too is refer your competition. Again, completely counterintuitive. A client will call me and say, Holley, can I hire you to do this? I'm like, absolutely not. You need to hire Verda. Absolutely not. Verda is the right person for this. It seems counterintuitive, but it really, when you have their best interest at heart, they trust you because you really do have their best interest at heart. So I know that was kind of going on a tangent, but I appreciate the question.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
I was just at a talk yesterday and somebody asked, well, what if the client doesn't want to do the right thing? And the answer from, I think it was this guy from Gensler said, we could turn away the work, but then some other firm might do an even worse job, right? So we have to take that company on and do the best that we can with them and, educate as much as you can softly or be very proactive. I think, to me, case studies really are huge. Like if you can show a client like what another similar company has done, and I think that's something that we could share amongst ourselves, is things that have really worked and very specific case studies. I think that would go a long way. But I was like, oh my God, that's so true. I guess we can't just look for the best projects and the most responsible clients, because that wouldn't get us very far.
That's right.
It's
I mean-
also an opportunity for scalability, right? That potentially by working with some of those other clients.
Yes. I mean, you guys kind of answered this next question, which was about how we can promote design and sustainability for clients who aren't interested, similar to the previous. But I heard something brilliant in Atlanta at the climate summit I was at with Verda, is that we don't need permission. We can just do it, and we should. But the last question I'm going to put out there for you all is about inclusivity and equity. So beyond, gender neutral restrooms, what other planning strategies are trending that support inclusivity and equity?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me is health and wellness is for everyone. And that's a big trend right now. And it's something that being transparent, there's an aspect of that that's equity as well. So that being transparent, show me all aspects of what you're doing. And I think that just fosters trust across all communities.
Yeah, I like that. It's so true.
I kind of think that the number one thing would be to bring those people that don't have a voice, that are part of the community, that are part of the larger stakeholder world, bring those to the people to the table in any way that you can. I mean, if you can actually truly bring them into the design process, that's amazing. But if you can at least just have conversations with these people so that you can understand their point of view and not just assume or design for somebody that has not been in the room and has not really said what they need. I would say that's number one. And I go back to what I said at the very beginning about this idea of, sustainability is no longer enough. We really need to be looking at being regenerative and giving back. And with every project that we do, and again, we don't have to necessarily ask permission, but why can't we in some way like carve out a space on the ground floor level for like a community space? Why can't we convince the client to invest in local businesses or whatever that community might need, or build a park or a garden or something like that, right? Or rooftop farm. So there's so many ways that can roll out. And I think that I could see a client just not being aware of what the possibilities are, and like, wow, rooftop garden, and oh, we could have all these really cool herbs for our cafeteria. That sounds amazing. And then all of a sudden you have a beautiful green space, right?
It's probably the hardest thing. I mean, at least in my experience, is the hardest thing is to really understand how to be inclusive, because we all know what it feels like to be excluded. But then to be included is a little less common, so I think it's, we've got to practice on finding all the extra opportunities that are in front of us. But it's a very interesting conversation ahead of all of us in the panel. And I'm gonna start to thank you all for participating in our discussion today. This was amazing. I feel very honored to have been, sitting here with you today for an hour on at least where I am, a sunny, sunny afternoon. But, I guess this is going to be recorded, and I'm looking forward to continuing the discussion with all of you. And I'm pleased to, hear that we're evolving. We're making sure that this conversation is making progress in terms of getting bigger and faster.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And it was really great to have you and Holley and Allison, you guys, it's great to hear all your comments. I hope we get to connect in person someday.
Yes, me too. Very inspirational.